Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 107 of the History Hotline. My name is Deanna Lincook, and I'll be your host today. Today's episode, as you probably know from the title, I am joined by a special guest, and on this episode, I'll be sharing an interview with Professor Hakim Adi as part of the ongoing series with the History Matters Journal, in order to kind of bring to light the work that they're doing over there, making Black British history a little bit more accessible for the average person. Professor Hakim Adi is the first Black professor of history in the UK. He is a founding member and former chair of the Black and Asian Studies Association, also known as BASA, which was chartered in 1991, and was a member of the Mayor of London's Commission on African and Asian Heritage. He's also widely written on the history of Africa and the African diaspora, and co-founded organisations such as the History Matters Collective and Journal, the Young Historians Project, where he serves as a consultant historian, and all this works together with others to challenge the underrepresentation of students and teachers of African and Caribbean heritage within the history discipline. He's currently a professor at the University of Chichester in the UK and teaches on courses related to Africa and the African diaspora, and also founded a Master's in Research in the History of Africa and the African Diaspora, which is available to take up there now. That bio is quite modest, to be honest. I could probably do a whole episode on a bio of Professor Adi, and all the things he has accomplished so far in making the discipline more accessible, and also allowing people to understand some of the systemic issues that have taken place within education that have led to a lack of understanding about Black British history of the African diaspora and Caribbean diaspora as well. And so we'll be talking about all those things in today's episode in the interview. So without further ado, here it is. So today on the History Hotline, we have a very special guest who I am very excited to introduce. Professor Hakim Adi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries at all. Now, I feel like this episode is one that I've wanted to do for a really long time, just to be able to sit down and speak to you about some of the work you've done when it comes to Black British history, and the History Matters Journal, Young Historians Project, and all these kind of groups and organisations that have been so integral in pushing forward curriculum when it comes to Black British history, within whether it be in secondary schools or in further education or higher education. And I just thought at this point we would do some quick fire questions, as we usually do on this podcast, just to get to know you a little bit more and to kind of get an understanding of how you reach this point in your career studying history and doing this work. So with that being said, can you cast your mind back? Was there a moment whereby you kind of decided that history was for you and you were going to pursue this long term? Thinking back.
I was pretty young when I
Okay.
made that decision.
Yeah.
Probably a teenager, probably about 13 or 14,
Oh, wow.
when I first began to kind of investigate, study African history. In fact, at that time, it wasn't even just African history, but actually Africa and the diaspora.
Mm.
Maybe it wasn't called that. I didn't think of it like that. But I began to, kind of investigate all of that when I was about 13 or 14. And, um, for my own uh, interest and sense of self and identity and so on.
Yeah.
And around the same time, I had actually always loved history, even as a very small child. My first books were history books,
Mm.
from 4 or 5 years old. But as a teenager, I began to look into the kind of things I look into today, and I decided then that I wanted to be a school teacher, a history teacher.
Yeah.
So that's when I really decided that I was going to study African history at university, and yeah, the rest
Yeah.
is
The rest
history,
is
as I said.
absolutely, as they say. Do you have? I know you do study quite a wide geographical and chronological range. Is there a period that you just think that was wonderful? I really like looking at that particular time period historically.
There are a lot of different periods that are fascinating, but I suppose the one I tend to find myself in the 20th century quite a lot. A
Yeah.
lot of my work has been on 20th century. Um, and I suppose the interwar period, 1920s, 1930s, probably is a period I have spent most time on.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's quite an interesting period. I suppose that's the period I'm most familiar with in terms of studying and research and so on. But I mean, there are lots of other periods that are um, fascinating for one reason or another. But if I had to
Absolutely.
pick, I'd probably say, yeah,
Yeah.
1920s, 1930s, yeah.
Okay. Nice. And then, do you have a favorite historical figure at all,
Oh, wow.
for any reason, inspirationally, or you resonate with them, or they did something
There are a
cool?
lot of people, I would say probably Paul Robeson is probably one, I'd
Yeah.
say. Um, Definitely for his politics and his stand in life.
Yeah.
Um, I did something for BBC History magazine where I had to propose the world's greatest figure or something like that.
Hmm.
I can't remember exactly how it went now. And I chose Cabral, Amilcar Cabral,
Okay.
um, as another important figure,
Yeah.
inspirational figure. But you're probably Robeson. I'd probably go with Robeson.
I like that, definitely. And is there a figure then, maybe Robeson or somebody else, that you wish more people knew about today?
I think probably I'd say Alice Kinloch. uh,
Yeah.
is an important figure and a very interesting figure that we all need to know more about. I would like to know more about because she's a little bit mysterious in some ways,
Yeah.
um, especially in terms of her later life, and the fact that she was written out of history for so long. But a
Mm.
very important figure, an important woman, and the kind of founder of modern Pan Africanism. So yeah,
Wow.
Alice
Yeah,
Kinloch.
most definitely. She sounds like someone we should know more about. And I thought maybe at this point, we'll start to think about the History Matters journal
Mhm.
and the work that comes before that. Why did you decide to start the History Matters journal? And what were the kind of steps in the work that came before that? And you can go as far back as you need to.
Well, the work of History Matters as a kind of initiative
Yeah,
began in 2014, mainly in response to a a newspaper article,
yeah,
which was about how many history teachers, black history teachers, there were had been trained the previous year.
mm,
And the article said that in Britain there are only three been
wow.
trained.
In training that
Yeah,
year.
the previous year, only three had been trained, and this is I can't remember exact figures. There's something like 16,000 history teachers in Britain, and that year only three. Anyway, so that I found quite a shocking statistic, and it sort of prompted me to think not just about history teachers, but about historians, students, number of PhD students, number of under, black undergraduates studying history, the whole
Yeah.
thing, it just kind of brought it home to me. It wasn't as if it was
Mm,
new, but it concentrated my mind a little bit. And I thought, well, this something someone should do something about it. This is kind of, scandalous. So we got a group together of there were some PhD students, people at that time who were doing PhDs. There were one or
yeah.
two teachers. There were a few of us who were historians. There was a small group of people, um, and began to. We wrote a letter, for example, to the Times educational supplement. And then we tried to contact various organizations who we thought should be concerned about these kind of statistics and doing something about it, like the Royal Historical Society, Historical Association,
Mm.
HEFKI. HEFKI at that time had I don't know what they called a diversity subcommittee or some kind of group in HEFKI.
Yeah.
And we contacted all of them and said, well, what are you doing about this? And they all said nothing. Or they all said, what do you mean do something? Hefke said, what? What do you mean? So we said, well, something should be done. And we should at least discuss what's going on. You know, what's going on? What's the reason for this? And so we began to do a little bit of research and the statistics and how many students there were and how many historians and all this kind of thing. And then organized and kind of, I won't say dragged, but encouraged the Royal Historical Society, the Historical Association, and one or two others to be involved in this conference, which
Yeah.
we held in April 2015, so 8 years ago. Um, and that's kind of the launch of History Matters publicly, you could say. And out of that conference, that was a conference mainly of all the speakers were students or teachers speaking about their own experience and so on. And the consequence of that conference was we had a whole kind of raft of resolutions and or recommendations and so on. So out of that conference then came Young Historians Project,
Yeah.
the Masters in Research program at University of Chichester, and actually one or two other things which are not necessarily around at the moment. So that kind of put History Matters, that was the work of History Matters. And then part of that was to also to kind of develop what people call Black British history, so the history of African and Caribbean people in Britain. The
Yeah.
fact that it's not as developed as it needs to be, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that was missing from that was a publication, a journal. Um, and the original idea of it was to kind of reestablish in a way what we used to have with the Bassa newsletter. Bassa was set up in 1991 and by myself, Marika Sherwood, and others,
Yeah.
and ran for so many years. And we had a regular newsletter. It wasn't a journal; it was called a newsletter. But it used to have articles, but it also had other contributions, news, information, various things. So the aim of History Matters was to kind of replicate that, but in a sort of 21st century way, having it online, encouraging people, especially those who are working in the area, those who are researching, those who are doing things, should publicize what they're doing, should
Absolutely.
promote what they're doing, encouraging people who might be, you know, undergraduates or at school or anybody who's doing anything related to this history should publicize it and so on. So that's really the idea of or how History Matters Journal emerged and developed.
Absolutely. Um, I think you kind of answered my second question as well, which were like, what were the aims that you set out? Which obviously you've said are kind of linking back to giving people a space that are doing this work already to be able to publish in something and have it read by a wide audience. Um, how do you think it's doing in that, in terms of being that space and
Well, it's definitely that space, and I was
yeah,
just looking, the editions before we started, and you see those people who are carrying out research are writing, and that's
yeah,
what we want. We obviously want more people. There are people. I mean, there are people around, especially after 2020. There are all these new posts were set up in Oxford, Cambridge, Leeds, Liverpool, but what are they doing?
yeah,
Nobody knows. So, I mean, why don't they contribute to the journal? Why don't they tell us what they're doing? on what their students are doing and encourage their students to contribute. So we need to widen it. We need to
Yeah.
widen the space and get more people involved. And I suppose that's really the task now to kind of to do that, to develop it in that way, to get more young people involved,
Yeah.
people who are at school, people who are just interested in, and we've done that a little bit. Some of YHP members have contributed, and which is great, and we need more of that as well. But also to others. So it's a work in progress, like everything.
Yeah.
And if everybody contributes, everybody promotes it, everybody talks about it, then it will get more well known. So that's the kind of key task, I suppose, at the moment.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something quite interesting that I wanted to talk to you about anyway with 2020, and there's a lot of posts have been kind of created for people, and there was this big push, or so it seemed, to Black British history, and we've got to do all this stuff. Did you notice, because the History Matters Journal and BASA and all this stuff, it obviously predates 2020. Did you notice doing this work a shift or an increase in interest, and how do you kind of feel that it's gone on as we've kind of moved away from 2020 and are 3 years on?
Um, I mean, 2020 was definitely a significant in the sense that, as you remember that during that period, especially a lot of the kind of young youth who were involved in those protests and demonstrations, specifically talked about history and
Yeah.
what they were taught or not taught in schools and universities. I even, quoted some of them in my book.
Yeah.
Um, so that was an important element because 2020 kind of highlighted the sort of racism and Eurocentrism of Britain.
Hmm.
What's going on, what's not right, and so on. And so many universities responded to that
Yeah.
in different ways. Even my own university was forced to make a statement, whatever that was all about. I mean, other universities went a step further and created these posts. But then the question is, what are these posts really all about?
Yeah.
Are they posts to actually develop courses and strands and and so on, and actually develop, or are they a little bit more cosmetic?
Yeah.
And because I mean, for example, to give the example of goldsmiths, for example,
Yeah. Of course.
which I was actually the external whatever advisor for that.
Yeah.
And well, what's happened to it? It
Yeah.
lasts for a
It's
few
gone.
years and it's disappeared.
Yeah.
So there's always a danger with universities that they do these things for whatever reason, for short-term gain, as it were, or publicity or whatever, and but with no real commitment to them. And you know, we've seen that not just in education, but in other areas and so on. But there's no doubt that the world is a different place now, and
Yeah.
the thing is, we have to kind of take advantage of that space and widen it and work within it to develop more, or to further develop things, I think, and not
Yeah.
never rely on the institutions, the universities, the governments, the whatever to
Mhm.
do things. That's how I would see it.
Yeah. Absolutely. How then do you think we best go about things like curriculum change, in terms of, if you don't have the people taking it up at GCSE, they're not going to do it A level and undergrad and postgrad and whatever else and become historians and lecturers. When I guess the majority for most people of their education comes from the education system that is, challenged by the government. And
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, which we've been grappling with for about 35 years, maybe longer than 35 years. Actually, if you look at the history of it,
yeah.
it definitely goes back to the early 1970s.
Mm.
But I mean, personally, I've been grappling with it for about 35 years. And, we used to put a lot of concentration on the national curriculum.
Yeah.
Um, and some headway was made in that area, definitely. But today it's a little bit more complicated because most schools, especially most secondary schools, are academies.
Yeah.
Academies don't have to follow the national curriculum. So that's kind of shifted the goalposts, as it were. And I think the key thing is really to, um, to educate people generally. So
Yeah.
that means, students, it means parents, it means teachers, it means everybody. That, there is a problem about history and the way it's presented,
Mm.
and it needs to change. And that is a big fight. It's not just a fight within the education system, as it were. It's, a wider kind of political fight, you could say,
Yeah.
about how history is presented in Britain, why it's presented in such a Eurocentric manner, whose interest does that serve, and all these kinds of questions. And so, taking up that question on the broadest front, as it were, in the kind of research that we do, in the writing that we do, in the History Matters Journal, in Young Historians Project, in on TV, on wherever, on radio, in podcasting, and everywhere,
Yeah.
is very, very crucial. But then you also need to do that in a kind of organized way, to have places where you can do that. Um, and so History Matters Journal is one of those places. Young Historians Project is one of those places, and then there will be others. And the key thing always is to kind of try and work together. And sometimes you have a lot of people who are all sort of chipping away at things, but in isolation from each other. So it's always good if people can link up and can work together and to kind of solve these problems. But it's a big problem to resolve, and it's reflective of the whole education system and whose interests it actually serves, and
Yeah.
these are big questions.
Absolutely. But I think you've raised an important point that it's a lot of people needing to be chipping away at something much bigger by way of things like the History Matters Journal, YHP, which is a really good platform and space for young people to, come together as have history as a hobby and do that kind of research and do that work. And even if they're not necessarily going for historical careers or careers within the field, they can kind of continue that because I think, annoyingly for me, I always think that Black history is always so politicized when actually it's just really interesting across the board, whether you like Caribbean history, African history, or the history of those diasporas in Britain or America. It's just interesting. And for us in YHP, we spend our Sunday mornings and Thursday evenings and whatever else because we just love history, and it denies so many young people of a really interesting and wide ranging education when you don't allow them to do this kind of work and do this kind of have this education in schools. It's quite frustrating, really.
No, that's absolutely right, and I mean it is, as you say, it's just history. I mean it's not,
Mm,
it's no more, no less than that. But I mean, it does play, or let's say the absence of it
yeah.
does play a big part in people's lives, because
Hmm.
you grow up as if you don't exist, or your family doesn't exist, or people who
Yeah.
look like you don't exist, or are presented in only a negative way. And that has a big impact on people, not just on black people, on everybody, because you
Yeah.
have a distorted view of the world and your place in it and your power and your agency and all these kinds of things, which are very, very important. So, um, you could say, like, not allowing people to actually understand, to learn, to embrace their history is, I was going to say, sort of like a form of child abuse.
Yeah.
Because you're growing up in a society which is denying your kind of existence, your history, I mean, it's like a massive attack on people's identity, on people's whole being.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that sense, it is a very political thing, the absence
Mm.
of it, and the right to have it. It is a right, to just like having your anything, your language, your culture, your history, and so on. So it is very, very important. Um, and as far as YHP is concerned, we would love to expand it.
Yeah.
If we can have, 300 people or 3,000 people, great.
Yeah.
And you could say that's a kind of aim. You have a YHP which is, doing all kinds of things and different projects and all over the
Yeah.
place, and so fine.
Mm.
Obviously, we need the people to do that, the training to do it, the resources to do it, and so step by step,
Yeah.
we can work to do that.
Absolutely. Just for anyone that doesn't know or has been living under a rock and not listened to any of these past episodes, can we just talk about what YHP is, the Young Historians Project? And I know you've already spoken about how it kind of came out of History Matters Collective and the work there, but outside of that, what were the kind of specific aims for YHP in its creation?
Well, the aim of it was to have something for young people to kind of assist young people of African and Caribbean heritage to engage with history, to have
Yeah.
a history that they could engage with, could be excited about, could get involved in, and could find out more about things that interested them that maybe they weren't finding out at school or university or wherever on TV. To
Mm.
find out these things, and then to present them to their
Yeah.
peers, to other young, even not so young people, to say, well, this is what we found, here it is, and present it in an exciting and interesting way, whether it's a mural, it's an exhibition, it's a podcast, it's a film, it's a whatever. So that was the basic aim of it. And of course, over the last 8 years, we developed it stage by stage. It's bigger now than it was, and we've got people all over the country, and of course, with all of that brings its own challenges and problems you have to solve, and keeping everyone involved, and all this kind of thing. But the key thing about YHP is that it's the members who decide all these things, who solve all these problems, who do all this work.
Yeah.
It's been like that from the beginning, and that's its great strength. It's an organization of young historians solving the problems that confront young people in this country, which is lack of engagement or lack of enthusiasm about history. So it's dealing with those issues and problems, and also um, doing very important research that nobody
Yeah.
else is doing. So, when we did even the work on Black Liberation Front, okay, there are a few people writing about it, but we actually did research, interviewed people, produced a film, produced exhibition, all these kinds of things.
Mm.
And similarly on African women, nobody writes about African women in Britain. Nobody.
Yeah.
No, there's no research. So for the first time, okay, YHP did this research. African women in healthcare, interviewed them, did original research, found out all kinds of people who were nurses and doctors and this and that 100 years
Yeah.
ago, and presented it. Everybody can come and look at it, and it's um, and that's also very important that you make research public. There's no
Yeah.
point doing with some research and it's in some journal somewhere nobody can find it, or it's hidden somewhere. We want everybody to see it and to use it and to learn from it and to be enthusiastic about it. So that's what YHP is all about. And of course, in
Yeah.
the course of doing these things, young people are becoming or training themselves as historians because they're doing archival research, they're interviewing people, they're learning how to make films, how to make exhibitions, how to do podcasts, how to develop murals, how to speak in public, how to organize themselves, how to change the situation from what it was to what they want it to be. And that's also very important. And we hope that people, okay, people may not be with YHP forever, but then maybe they can be involved in other things or in history
Yeah.
matters or doing something else or organizing a conference or doing a PhD or doing some other research. Or so it's contributing in that way as
Yeah.
well to
Absolutely.
the problems that we're trying to solve.
Definitely. It's multifaceted
Mm.
in its reach and in its kind of the way in which it will have a positive impact. But I think one of the important ones you mentioned is making these histories that then are first of all underserved more accessible, because there's no point doing all that work and, as you said, having it somewhere behind a paywall or where nobody can access it, or in an inaccessible form, because not everybody has the time or the means to take in articles and things of that nature. But the great thing about History Matters is that it's online, it's free to download. You just need a device, a phone, a tablet, a laptop, and you've got a PDF and you can read it at your own disposal. You can print it if you'd like it, or you can read it on your screen. It's so simple. So if you are listening now, please do access that. All the links will be in the show notes for the episode.
I just say the other thing, if people are looking at it for the first time, or even the second time or the third time, it's great to have people's comments. We tend to think of history as what's the word, like a commodity, in the sense that it's something served like on a plate and you consume it, but it's really like a process, an interaction between people. So we need people's comments. What do they like? What is useful? What's not useful? What are they
Yeah,
doing? What do they think about this? What is it? Maybe they know something about something that's mentioned in one of the articles, or they even know somebody who's mentioned in one of the articles. So we need people to kind of feedback, to give their views, to give their comments, to give their suggestions. And we're happy to print things that people say, or requests that people have, or information that people need. Or so
yeah,
we want to make it more of a, um, like a something which is a conversation, a discussion. Yeah, a discussion is a better way of looking at it. A discussion, not just a presentation of articles and book reviews and other information, but people also sending in their own ideas, information, and what they're doing, and that kind of thing as well.
absolutely. It's wonderful. And yeah, needed. If you have any kind of comments or anything, you can email the History Matters Journal, or you can reach out to them on their socials, which will all be in the show notes for the episode if you need that. I was just wanting to also talk about some of your work in regards to your book, which is another way that history can be more accessible. In all 676 pages of African and Caribbean people in Britain, a history, which came out September 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of tracks exactly that, African and Caribbean people in Britain from as early as the Roman era to a kind of today. You look at Black Lives Matter and that movement, which is the first book that's done that and has that such wide ranging scope in terms of time period and people covered and organizations and events and all that stuff. So why, not why did you write this book, but why did you feel now was a time, or when you decided to start working on it, why was now necessary, and kind of what do you decide to include and not to?
Well, I mean, the question about when and why and how is really, you'd have to ask Penguin the answer.
Oh.
They're the ones who asked me to write it. Um,
Nice.
I can't remember. They may have told me why, but I can't
Yeah.
remember what they said. It's such a long time ago. So that was really what gave me the opportunity to write it. The fact that I was asked to write it, and I was happy to do that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I tried to, as you say, kind of sum up the history as far as one could. In fact, even going back to 10,000 years ago. Um, so when you look at it like that, 10,000 years or even 2,000 years of history, then nearly 700 pages isn't very much. But um, it is. There's quite a lot there, and one of the important things was to provide references for people, so that if people are particularly interested in something I may not have been able to spend very much time on,
Yeah.
they can find books, articles, websites, other information that they can look into. So that was one aim, to provide that kind of information. And then um, the other was to try to build on the work that Peter Fry did with staying power,
Yeah.
um, in the sense that staying power was written in 1984, which is whatever it is, uh, 40 years ago, like
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next year.
So it's quite a long time ago. So the thing is that there's been a lot of research since
Yeah.
that. And so the aim of the book was to try and reflect that research as far as possible. And so that, in a way, dictated what was in the book. So where people have done work, that is included in the book. There are obviously some areas where there hasn't been so much work. For example, the 21st century, there's some work, but not that much yet.
Yeah.
I tried to say something about the 21st century, as you say, and you know, Black Lives Matter and the aftermath of Stephen Lawrence
Mm.
murder and various other issues. Um, so-called Windrush scandal and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
But the main thing is to try to, yeah, to present the latest research and fill in the gaps, as it were, since 1984. So that's really the aim of it. And then there were some things which I thought needed to be done a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Peter Fry's book, he spends a lot of time talking about sort of racism and ideas of uh, kind of pseudo scientific racism and all that kind of thing. So, there's no point. I mean, that was actually quite a large part of staying power. So there's no need to do that. So what I did was to do things like look at anti-racism
Yeah.
and what is the history of anti-racism, not in great depth, but at least to begin presenting that, because I thought it was very important to, because the history of racism, as it were, is really the history of um, like the enemy.
Yeah.
So who wants to know?
Yeah.
Who wants to know? We know what they're up to, but then we need to know, okay, what, and that, if you're not careful, that kind of distorts things a little bit, because people then think, oh yeah, Britain's a very racist place, and everybody's very racist or whatever they think.
Mm.
But obviously, where you have that attack on people, you also have the resistance,
Yeah.
and so the history of anti-racism, which goes back, as long as there's racism, there was anti-racism. People saying, well, this is ridiculous and so on. So I try and present that in different ways throughout the book, obviously right up to the present moment, and Black Lives Matter, which is the latest manifestation of it. So there are things like that where are included, and various struggles of that kind. But yeah, that's the essence of what is included.
Yeah, nice. In your research process, or maybe even writing, was there anything that you were coming across that was shocking to you? Whether it was like things you access or you couldn't access, or things that you learnt about or knew about that you just thought I didn't know that was that way, or
I would, well, having said that, I tried to concentrate on anti-racism. Actually, the levels of racism actually
mm,
shocked me.
yeah,
even though I kind of knew it all before, you could say. But when you spend, such a long time writing about these things over, particularly the last century or so,
Yeah.
the 20th century in particular, 20th century is quite startling, startling, shocking.
Mm.
The levels of, state racism, which is like the main form of racism, it's quite unbelievable.
Mm.
I mean, even if you just look at like Stephen Lawrence's case, it's
Yeah.
absolutely you cannot you couldn't make it up.
Yeah.
For whatever it is now, the best part of 30 years, it's
Yeah.
going on and on and on, and you can say like inquiry after inquiry and so on.
Mm.
And all the other thing about these inquiries is they always bring up something new, some new aspect of. It's just incredible,
Yeah.
and you think of the impact that has had on everybody in the country over
Mm.
and what people have had to do, and yeah, that was quite um, sort of shocking actually to to present that over so many years and see the state acting in that way. And then, you have obviously modern examples like
Yeah.
the Windrush scandal or like over, Colston or whatever, these things. And it's like, it just shows you how kind of rotten
Yeah.
the whole system is.
Yeah. To the core.
And the government and, the way the police operate and, all the kind of institutions of the state are completely rotten.
Yeah.
Absolutely all need to be completely, wiped away
Got it
and
out.
come again with something modern and new, which actually looks after the interests of people and so on. And I mean, I think now we've almost got to the stage where, you know, probably the majority of people in the country recognise that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's becoming more and more exposed. Um, I mean, there's some things like, the case of like Winston True, for example, in the Oval Four.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like I say, you couldn't invent it.
No.
Somebody wrote it. It's no, it couldn't happen. Somebody can
No.
spend 50 years
Mm.
trying to, clear their name
Yeah.
when everybody, it must have been clear to, you know, the whole of the Metropolitan Police, the judiciary, the governments for 50 years that this is a miscarriage.
Yeah.
So then you conclude from that, as I say, just how rotten everything is.
Mm.
You can't have any faith or confidence or trust in any of this. It needs to be
Mm.
got rid of.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the answer to your question.
Mm. No, that makes sense. Was there a shift then, maybe going from the 20th century to the 21st? I'm just thinking about maybe racism then. I know that's not what the book is about, but
I wouldn't say there's a shit. No, I would.
no,
I'd
it's
say
still
there's a continuation. Yeah,
okay.
I think there's a continuation. I think what you have now in the 21st century is, and I think Black Lives Matter was a very good example of that, is that
Yeah.
the vast majority of people, has generally been the case in Britain's history. This is the other thing, because if in the book I talk about the 18th century and the struggle against human trafficking,
Yeah.
which is a kind of fascinating period in Britain's history because it was such an enormous movement,
Mm. Yeah.
a kind of mass movement involving, all sections of the population, workers, particularly workers,
Mm.
women, the intellectuals and others, the whole country.
Yeah.
People signing petitions in their millions.
Mm.
It's actually one of the great moments in Britain's history, and so nobody ever talks about it.
Mm.
It's completely hidden as if it never happened. But what it demonstrates is the basic kind of anti-racism and kind of humanity of people in Britain.
Mm.
So then, Black Lives Matter was very similar in the sense that literally from Land's End to John O'Groats,
Yeah.
in the smallest villages, places you'd never heard of. People, even I'm down here in the middle of Kent, and I was, watching these things, Black Lives Matter, and then I'd find out, oh, well, actually, in the next town, I didn't even know anything about it.
Yeah.
So, literally, everywhere,
Mm.
people came out and said, enough is enough.
Yeah.
So this again expresses the kind of general sentiments of probably the vast majority of people. And then obviously in some places you have people say, look, we had enough of this, this criminal being publicly exhibited in our city. It's disgraceful. We're not going to
Mm.
accept it anymore. Let's get rid of it and throw it in the sea or whatever. Which is a very, democratic and what can you say, like kind of principled thing to do. To say, look,
Yeah.
we've been trying for so many years to rid ourselves of this, this disgusting thing and so on. And then the reaction of the powers that be to all that, it's
Yeah.
oh no 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 no,
Mhm.
personally we can't have that kind of thing. No no no, these are very important. These criminals and it again it shows you the difference between the vast majority of people in the country and then those who govern
Yeah.
and their interests and their orientation and their sentiment on everything is just completely as it is on everything.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's so I think in the 21st century these things have become even sharper in a way, and that's why we're seeing over history, much more of a struggle because people want something new. They want something that reflects how people are in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Whereas the powers that be want to take us back to the 19th century. So,
Yeah.
no, we can't do that. That's shocking. We've got to have some criminal there, and you just see this kind of struggle between the old and the new.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Definitely. Oh, that's a good, really good answer. Thank you for that. I was just thinking in terms of your next publications, if you want to talk about them, and work that is coming out and how that kind of continues to add to this ever growing body of work on the diaspora in Britain.
Well, the next thing that will come out will be come out in July, and is called Many Struggles. I think it's called New Histories of African and Caribbean People in Britain. We published by Pluto, and it's a collection of essays, articles, essays that came out of the last History Matters conference. Again, from young, as we say, young and emerging historians, most of them, the vast majority, those of African and Caribbean heritage.
Yeah.
So it has chapters, things are from the 18th century, different parts of the country, to 20th century, where people writing on women, on student organizations, on various aspects of Black power, on Black parents movement, on yeah, a whole variety of things. I think we've got like 15 chapters,
Yeah.
and we've also got contributions from some of those who spoke in the conference who were involved with the Black Liberation Front, Tony Suarez, Ansel Wong, Zainab Abbas. So we've got a massive variety of work, some of it from members of Young Historians Project, from others who are doing PhDs, a couple of things from a couple of, you can say, emerging young or younger historians. So yeah, we've got a whole
Yeah.
range there. So yeah, we hope that all new stuff. We hope it'll be useful and interesting for people, and yeah, we'll launch it in July and hope that it's popular, and then we'll try and hold the next History Matters conference, not this autumn, but autumn 24.
Yeah.
The call will be out for that soon, and we'd love to people to get involved and to speak and to publicize their work, and we'll do our best to make sure that that's published as well,
Yeah.
because the aim is always to publish these great work that people are doing, get more people to read it and to um, learn from it, and to encourage other people to yeah, to read about, to research, to find out about the history of African and Caribbean people in Britain.
Absolutely. Definitely makes sense. And the fact that I guess it's people that have gone up through the ranks of YHP or History Matters on the editorial team that are now, in a place to write these essays for this collection. It just shows that that work that's been done has been fruitful, in a sense that they're now in a position to write work that is, publishable, and people will be able to buy that book and read it. I think it's available for pre-order at the moment. It comes out on the 5th of July, so it will be shipped then. You can get that on the Pluto Press website if that is something of interest to you. I'll definitely, well, mine's already pre-ordered, so
Oh,
not a
very good,
problem there.
very good.
I think in closing, and just to kind of to summarize, I will signpost people to everything that we've spoken about in terms of books, journals, subscribing, and that kind of thing. But I wondered if you had any final words that you wanted to add.
I think to encourage people to, as I said before, to contribute to it.
Yeah.
Nothing is too small. You know, we we publish book reviews and so on, which are not that long. But anyone who's doing anything or has an interest or has a view or an idea about an individual or an organization, or has a photo or a document or something they want to say, should definitely contribute and see themselves as contributing to the journal. If
Yeah.
people want to join the editorial working group, then again they can write in. We're always eager to have more hands on deck and people contributing. Certainly, those who are, you know, students or doing PhDs or teaching or whatever, who are interested in this history, should definitely get involved. It's something for
Mm,
all of us to be involved in. If you think the history is important, then you should be involved in doing something about it. And I
absolutely.
always say that to be a historian, it's not enough to just research and write. You
Yeah.
have to be doing more than that. Because,
Mm,
our history is not like, it's not like just sort of Tudors and Stuarts. It's a history that has to be fought for
yeah.
and promoted, and um, yeah, we have to be active on promoting it and working on it and developing it more and encouraging others, and not shut away in ivory towers or even ebony towers, working to find ways of encouraging others. And if we have made some advances ourselves, then what are we doing to encourage other younger people to get involved, to take up these problems for solutions? So that's how I always look at things. We want more people to be involved. It's not like an exclusive club or sect
Yeah.
like some academic historians have, where they think only certain people can be involved. Everyone should be involved.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, if you've got ideas or you're not sure how you can get involved, write in, and we'll definitely be willing to discuss and to chat and to suggest things.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And I think that is everything to talk about today. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Thank you for giving your time. Been a fantastic interview. Really, really enjoyed it. And I'm really
You're
happy that you've been here. Thank you.
welcome anytime. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the History Hotline. If you've enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend to tell a friend. To continue the conversation about Black history, head over to our social media platforms at the History Hotline on Instagram and at the History HL on Twitter.